This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and in this video we're going to look at the Beatles single that marked the end of an era. The Beatles began 1966 exactly as they'd begun the previous 2 years, sitting proudly at number 1 in the UK charts with We Can Work It Out Day Tripper, their 9th single to reach that position. Their latest album, Rubber Soul, released on the same day, also topped the album chart, where it would remain for the next 6 weeks. On the surface, it looked like business as usual. The Beatles were still at the centre of the pop music universe. The old formula was still working, but the wider pop landscape was already changing. At the start of 1965, the chart still felt comfortably early 60s. Pop vocalists and clean-cut beat groups delivering hits built on melody and charm. Fast forward just 12 months to early 1966, and that certainty had gone. And now you've got American soul records, Northern soul records, Bob Dylan, British R&B, and perhaps most significantly, this. Suddenly, the world the Beatles helped to create is beginning to outgrow the rules they had written. The Beatles weren't just dominating the Beatlemania pop anymore, they were dominating a much broader and evolving market. They were no longer just one of the leading forces in pop music, they were pop music. And yet inside the Beatles world, something was beginning to shift. When the single was being prepared, We Can Work It Out was initially assigned the A-side. It made sense. On the surface, it felt like the more polished, optimistic record, a familiar Beatles sound and a reliable chart hit. But John was just as convinced that Day Tripper should be the lead. We Can Work It Out drew its strength from melody and warmth, whereas Day Tripper was built around Lennon's riff, tougher, more abrasive, and a little less polite. It wasn't a big drama, but it was a sign. Their longtime recording engineer Norman Smith later remembered that stronger disagreements emerged during the Rubber Soul sessions. Not fights, just two confident songwriters starting to pull in different directions. The double A-side idea wasn't entirely unprecedented. A Hard Day's Night and Things We Said Today had originally been marked up as one, as this demonstration copy shows. But in the end, nothing could realistically compete with the film's title song. And it wasn't only inside Abbey Road that a shift was beginning. Even outside the studio, people were starting to notice that something felt different about the Beatles. And part of that came down to how the single first appeared in the charts. In late 1965, there wasn't one definitive UK chart. Papers like Record Retailer, Melody Maker, and the New Musical Express all told slightly different stories. We Can Work It Out Day Tripper didn't top every chart immediately, and that brief hesitation was enough to prompt a question that hadn't really been asked before. A few days after the single was released, the Daily Express ran a piece by journalist Judith Simons, alongside a classic David Bailey photograph with a striking headline. A moment just to ask, is the mania changing? 6 palpable hits later, it has happened again. The Beatles' latest has failed to reach the top place in just one of the 2 rival charts immediately. Not panic, but doubt. A tiny pause in that unstoppable upward line. And then the key question. Does this mark a change in Beatlemania? Even the press sensed the frenzy wasn't quite the same as it had been in 1963 or 1964, when new Beatles singles were assumed to go straight to number 1 without question. Simons then spoke to George Harrison, who explained why the single had 2 A-sides. The group thought that Day Tripper should be the A-side. Our recording manager George Martin announced it would be We Can Work It Out. So there it is. Not hindsight, but a contemporary account of how the 2 songs were viewed at the time by someone who was there in the room. But once the press began to ask, is Beatlemania changing? It already has.
Not a single moose all day.
Don't fret, George. This'll do the trick.
What in blazes is that silly contraption?
It's my special moose horn. One blast on this, and every moose on the loose will come running. Yeah.
Really? It works!
What did I tell you? Yeah. And now a sweet tune from our sponsor.
Squarespace is the platform I use to showcase my work online. And if you're someone with a passion, whether that's music, photography, writing, collecting, anything creative, it's the perfect way to build a professional portfolio website quickly and beautifully. Their award-winning templates make your work look great right away. You can easily add pages, galleries, and even a store if you want to sell things like prints, merch, or digital downloads. It all works flawlessly on mobile too, which is important because most people now discover things on their phones first. So, if you've been wanting a clean modern home for your creative work online, head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/parlogram to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Judith Simons wasn't the only one who noticed something different. That same week, Melody Maker ran a piece under the headline, Beatles' New Disc Misses #1 Spot. For the first time since December 7th, 1963, a newly issued single by the Merseysiders failed to fly automatically to #1. That was Melody Maker talking about its own chart, of course, and the other papers told slightly different stories. But the reaction itself is the point. A Beatles single not automatically arriving at the top, even in one major chart, felt unthinkable. And although Day Tripper We Can Work It Out reached #1 the following week, that brief hesitation was enough to prompt a question that hadn't really surfaced before. Does this mean the Beatles are slipping? Of course they weren't. Advance orders for the single were well over 500,000. Rubber Soul was projected to do the same. Commercially, the Beatles were as dominant as ever. But the fact anyone even asked that question tells you how much the climate had changed. For the first time, momentum alone didn't feel guaranteed. A new Beatles record had to prove itself, even at the very top. And that feeds directly back into what was happening inside the band. From here on, John and Paul weren't always pulling in exactly the same direction. There's another factor too. By the end of 1965, the Beatles had achieved everything they'd set out to do. They'd reached the top in Britain, conquered America and then the rest of the world, reinvented the pop film, virtually invented the pop music video, and reshaped the entire music industry. They had rewritten the pop rulebook from front to back. So the big question became, where do you go when you've already reached the top? Everyone else, EMI, the press, the fans, was perfectly happy with the norm. Same process, same success, same results. But the Beatles were restless.
1, 2, 3, 4.
They recorded Day Tripper in 3 takes. We Can Work It Out in 2. A little overdubbing and the job was done. They had perfected the pop machine, and they were bored of it. Although its take on relationships is more adult and realistic than their earlier hits, We Can Work It Out still fits the classic Beatles mould. Day Tripper, by contrast, signals a shift, tougher in sound, sharper in tone, and already moving away from the familiar pop language of romance. And that shift was about to become much clearer.
1966.
So far, we've talked about sound. But there's something even more important changing here. What the Beatles are writing about. By late 1965 and into early 66, John and Paul were already moving towards a new approach to songwriting. Looking back a few years later, an Observer magazine piece summed up that shift very plainly. Keep off sex, write about things. Nowhere Man was the clearest expression of that thinking. A song not about a girlfriend or dancing, but about an isolated figure unsure of his place in the world. That simply wasn't what a pop single was supposed to be in 1965. Even We Can Work It Out shows a new maturity. It's a negotiation, not a fantasy. It's a relationship with complications. It's still pop, but real life has entered the lyrics. This is the start of the Beatles writing for themselves, not simply for the charts. And if audiences had to come with them, so be it. It's not yet the come with us or be left behind moment, but you can already feel the direction things are going. There was still the unusual situation between EMI in the UK and Capitol in the US. In Britain, singles were kept off albums to avoid fans paying twice. In the US, Capitol wanted more Beatles product. However, it could be assembled. Released in June 1966, Yesterday and Today was made by pulling together tracks from Rubber Soul, early Revolver sessions, and both We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper. It wasn't the Beatles' vision, it was the system trying to keep up with them. This album underlines the shift. Singles were no longer the main creative event. The important ideas were happening on albums. So when the press asked John early in 1966 what's next, he didn't talk about charts or competition. He said, "We're trying for this new sound. Create, man, create." That's the sound of a band ready to break out. And you can hear the break immediately in the very next single. The B-side Rain goes even further. Slowed down tape for a thicker instrumental groove, backwards vocals never heard before on a pop record. This isn't music designed for screaming audiences, it's music designed for the studio. And here's the crucial thing. The Beatles didn't make this shift because the market demanded it. They made it because they demanded it. The world still wanted the Beatles of 1963, but those Beatles no longer existed. We Can Work It Out Day Tripper feels like the final product of the old way of working. The single designed to travel, to sell, and to fit the world the Beatles had already built. Paperback Writer Rain, by contrast, sounds like the beginning of a new phase, driven by where the band wanted to go next, rather than where the public expected them to be. Which is why this single marks the end of the first era of the Beatles. It's the moment where everything appears the same, just as everything is about to change. So when we look back at We Can Work It Out Day Tripper today, we shouldn't see just another number one. We should see the door closing on Beatlemania and opening onto Revolver. One era ending, the next already on its way. If you've enjoyed this look at a key turning point in the Beatles story, make sure you're subscribed because we'll be spending a lot more time in 1966 over the coming year. But that's all for this one, so I'll say bye for now and thanks for watching.